At 0630 on November 20th, 1944, Sergeant Jack Hardin was about to make the worst decision of his life. But first, he had to watch everything he knew about warfare become irrelevant. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, though the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees that morning, not from the fear, though the fear was there, sitting in his gut like a block of ice. His hands were shaking because his right boot was pressed against a firing pedal, and his eyes were locked on a target 400 yards away, through the barrel of a German 88mm anti-aircraft gun. The target was a Tiger tank, 60 tons of German engineering, the predator of the European battlefield, the thing that had killed more American boys than any other weapon in Hitler's arsenal, and Hardin was going to shoot it with its own gun. The long barrel of the Flak 36 was pointed directly at the Tiger's hull. Through the bore of the cannon, Hardin could see the gray steel perfectly centered in the circle of daylight at the far end of the tube. He could see the mud caked on the tank's spare track links. He could see the Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste coating its armor in that distinctive waffle pattern that made German tanks look like they'd been carved from concrete. His finger twitched. The metal pedal was cold even through the leather of his boot. Behind him, Private Tommy Kowalski was crying. The kid from Chicago had just loaded the last armor-piercing shell they had. 40 pounds of brass and hardened steel, 3 feet of potential violence. One shot, one chance. Corporal Sam Tucker stood at the trail of the gun hands, gripping the steel stabilizing leg like it was the only real thing left in the world. His face was the color of old newspaper. The Tiger was moving, closing the distance, 300 yards, 250. Hardin took a breath, he held it, and then everything went white. But to understand how a 26-year-old farm boy from Kansas ended up betting his life and the lives of 7 other men on a weapon he didn't know how to use, you have to go back. You have to go back 72 hours. You have to go back to when the mission was just a mission and the gun was just a target and death was still something that happened to other people. 72 hours earlier, Jack Hardin was still alive. He was also still ignorant of the fact that he would soon become one of only 3 men in the entire European theater of operations to successfully fire a captured German heavy anti-aircraft gun at an armored target and live to talk about it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. November 17th, 1944, Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The forest had a nickname among the men of the 1st Infantry Division. They called it the Green Hell. Some called it the Meat Grinder. The more literary types, the college boys who'd volunteered in 42 when patriotism still seemed like a simple thing, they called it the Death Factory. All the names meant the same thing. The Hurtgen was a place where American boys went in vertical and came out horizontal. The trees were the problem. Douglas fir and pine packed so tight that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. When German artillery found the range, the shells didn't hit the ground. They hit the canopy. They exploded in the treetops. The fragments came down like steel rain, shredding through helmets and flak jackets and faith in a benevolent God. Company K of the 3rd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment had entered the forest with 180 men 3 weeks earlier. By November 17th, they were down to 87. The missing 93 weren't all dead. Some were wounded. Some had trench foot so bad their boots had to be cut off their feet. Some had simply stopped functioning, their minds retreating to somewhere safer than a frozen hole in the ground where the trees wanted to kill you. But plenty were dead. Jack Hardin had been a sergeant for exactly 32 days. His predecessor, a staff sergeant from Pittsburgh named DeMarco, had been killed by a tree burst on October 16th during the fighting at Aachen. DeMarco had been a good NCO, patient, professional. He'd survived North Africa and Sicily and Normandy. He'd made it all the way to Germany before a German 105mm shell hit a pine tree 40 feet above his head and turned him into a memory. Hardin had inherited his squad, his stripes, and his foxhole. The foxhole still had DeMarco's blood on the sandbags. It was November 17th at 2100 hours when Captain Elias Drummond called the platoon together for a briefing. Drummond was 34, which made him ancient by infantry standards. He'd taught history at a high school in Connecticut before the war. Now he taught men how to stay alive in a place where history was being written in frozen mud and spilled blood. The briefing took place in what had once been a German bunker. It smelled like wet concrete and old fear. Drummond spread a map on an ammunition crate. The map showed a ridge designated Hill 402, approximately 2 kilometers east of their current position just outside the town of Groschau. Intelligence reports indicated a German artillery battery on the ridge. Fire support that was making life difficult for the main assault, planned for November 21st. The mission was simple. Simple in the way that missions were always simple when officers explained them. A night raid, neutralize the guns, open a path for the advance. Drummond looked at Hardin. The captain's eyes were the color of dishwater. They'd seen too much. He said, "We need volunteers." Hardin said, "We'll go." Tucker, standing next to him, didn't say anything. Tucker was from Texas, a rancher's son, who knew that sometimes you volunteered because not volunteering meant someone else had to. That was the code. That was how you lived with yourself. Drummond nodded. The nod said, "Thank you." It also said, "I'm sorry." "What kind of guns?" Tucker asked. "Does it matter?" Drummond said. "It was a fair question." After the briefing, Hardin stood outside the bunker smoking a cigarette he'd traded for 3 days earlier. The tobacco was British harsh and damp. It tasted like burning rope. He smoked it anyway because smoking gave you something to do with your hands, and if your hands were busy, they couldn't shake. Tucker joined him. They stood in silence for a while, watching their breath mist in the frozen air. Tucker said, "You know it's 88s up there." Hardin said, "How do you know?" "I heard Drummond talking to the radio man. They didn't want to tell us. Bad for morale." Hardin took a drag. The ember glowed orange in the darkness. "Bad for morale," he repeated, "like the whole damn forest isn't bad for morale." Tucker didn't laugh. Tucker never laughed anymore. None of them did. Hardin had learned about 88s in August outside a town in France called Mortain. That was when the Germans had tried their last big counterattack, trying to cut off Patton's Third Army. Hardin had been attached to a Sherman platoon as a forward observer. He'd been riding in the lead tank, designated Baker II, commanded by a lieutenant from Kansas named Dave Morrison. Morrison was from Topeka. Hardin was from Salina. They'd bonded over the fact that they both knew what real wheat looked like, and they both understood that people from the coasts thought Kansas was just a flat, empty space between the parts of America that mattered. Morrison had been 24. He'd been married for 8 months before shipping out. He carried a photograph of his wife in his helmet liner. Her name was Sarah. She taught piano. The 88 that killed Morrison came from a hedgerow 800 yards away. Hardin never saw the gun. He only saw the result. The shell hit the front glacis plate of Baker II. It punched through the armor like it was cardboard. The penetration created a pressure wave inside the tank that killed Morrison instantly. His body was still sitting in the commander's seat when they pulled him out, but there wasn't enough left of him to send home. Hardin had been scheduled to ride in Baker II that morning. He'd swapped positions with Morrison at the last minute because Hardin had been fighting a stomach bug and didn't want to be trapped inside a steel box if his intestines decided to mutiny. Morrison had taken his place. Morrison had died. Hardin had lived. That was 4 months ago. Hardin still saw Morrison's face sometimes when he closed his eyes, still heard the wet crunch of the impact, still smelled the copper and cordite and cooked metal. The gun that killed Morrison was an 88. Now Hardin was walking toward a ridge that held 4 of them. The universe had a sense of humor. 2 days before the mission, Hardin received a letter from his mother. Mail call was irregular in the Hurtgen. Sometimes you got 3 weeks of letters at once. Sometimes you got nothing for a month. This letter had been written on November 2nd. It had taken 15 days to find him. His mother's handwriting was shaky. She was 53, but the war had aged her. Her eldest son was in Germany. Her second son, Michael, had just finished basic training at Fort Benning. Her husband, Hardin's father, was a cripple from the last war and spent most of his time sitting in a chair on the porch staring at fields he could no longer work. The letter said Michael's deployment had been accelerated. He'd be shipping to Europe in December, probably the 79th Infantry Division. They were training for winter operations. The letter said, "Please, Jack, when he gets there, watch over him. Keep him safe. You're all I have." Hardin folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket. He didn't write back. What was he supposed to say? "Don't worry, Ma, I'll keep Mikey safe. I've got a great track record of keeping people alive." He thought about his father. John Hardin Sr. had enlisted in 1917, age 18, full of fire and faith in Woodrow Wilson's promises. He'd come home in 1919 missing his left leg below the knee and most of his illusions about what war meant. Hardin Sr. had said, when Jack enlisted in 42, "You're going to die for nothing, just like I gave my leg for nothing. They'll send you to fight in some European mud hole and you'll come back broken or you won't come back at all." Jack had said, "This is different. This is Hitler. This matters." His father had laughed. It was a bitter sound like metal scraping metal. It all matters when they're asking you to go. It all stops mattering when you're bleeding in a ditch. Now Hardin was in a ditch. Well, a foxhole. Close enough. He wondered if his father had been right. But there was another voice in Hardin's head, an older voice. His grandfather, Ezra Hardin, who died when Jack was 15. Ezra had fought in the Spanish-American War, back when wars still had dignified names and people believed they'd be over by Christmas. Ezra had come home with a scar on his shoulder and a philosophy about life that boiled down to one principle: fix what you can with what you have. Ezra had been a farmer, but he'd also been a mechanic, a carpenter, a veterinarian, and once during a desperate calving season, a makeshift surgeon. He could fix anything: tractors, windmills, broken bones, broken hearts sometimes. Jack remembered being 12 years old watching the threshing machine break down in the middle of harvest. His father, already crippled and bitter, had thrown his crutch at the machine and declared it ruined. They'd have to send to Topeka for a repairman. That would take 3 days. The wheat would rot in the field. Ezra had walked over to the machine. He was 70 by then, skin like old leather, hands like tree roots. He'd studied the thresher for maybe 5 minutes. Then he'd turned to Jack. "Come here, boy," he'd said. Jack had come. Ezra said, "What's this machine do?" Jack said, "It threshes wheat." Ezra said, "Break it down simpler." Jack thought about it. Wheat goes in, threshed wheat comes out. Ezra nodded. "Good. Now what makes it go?" "A belt. Connects the motor to the drum." "And what's broken?" "The belt snapped." Ezra smiled. "So we need a new belt." But we don't have a new belt, so what do we use? Jack had looked around. There was wire, there was rope, there was a leather harness from the old horse tackle. He'd pointed at the harness. Ezra had cut the harness into strips, wired it together, and wrapped it around the pulleys. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't proper, but when they started the motor, the drum turned, the wheat got threshed. Ezra had said engineers make things complicated because complicated makes them feel smart, but every machine is just a simple idea wrapped up in metal. Find the simple idea, Jack. Find what goes in, what comes out, and what makes it go. Everything else is decoration. Hardin thought about that now, sitting in his foxhole in the Hurtgen forest, cleaning his M1 Garand for the 15th time that day. Find the simple idea. He didn't know it yet, but in 48 hours, that lesson would save his life. November 19th, the night of the raid. 8 men moved through the forest like ghosts. Hardin led. Tucker was second. Behind them, Kowalski and Private Bobby Rourke, who was 19 and looked 16. Then Private Eddie Walsh from New York, who'd been an amateur boxer before the war and still had the flat nose to prove it. PFC Raymond Martinez, the medic who'd stopped talking about God after Normandy. Private Carl Becker, who'd been born in Pennsylvania to German immigrant parents and spoke the language fluently. Private Howie Goldstein from Brooklyn, the most motivated man in the squad when it came to killing Nazis. And Private Jim Delacroix, a Cajun from Louisiana who could move through underbrush quieter than a deer. They moved slowly. The forest at night was a living thing. Every sound meant something. The crack of a twig could be a boot or a deer. The rustle of branches could be wind or an ambush. You learned to read the darkness or you died. It took them 4 hours to cover 2 kilometers. At 0230, Delacroix held up a fist. The column froze. Ahead through the trees, orange light flickered, campfire or lantern. Voices carried on the frozen air, German voices. Laughing. Someone was telling a joke. Hardin moved up beside Delacroix. They crouched behind a fallen log, thick with frost. 4 guns, Delacroix whispered. Big ones. Barrels pointing up. Crews in a bunker 100 yards south of the gun pits. Hardin looked. The ridge was a natural defensive position, clear fields of fire to the east and west. The Germans had dug the guns into reinforced positions, sandbags and timber revetments. The barrels were covered with camouflage netting, and they were massive. Even in the darkness, Hardin could see the distinctive length of an 88mm flak 36. The barrels looked like telephone poles. The breeches looked like bank vaults. These were the guns that ruled the sky over Germany, the guns that shot down American bombers at 20,000 feet, the guns that could put a shell through 6 inches of armor from 2 miles away. And in 90 minutes, if everything went according to plan, they'd belong to the United States Army. Tucker crawled up beside Hardin. He looked at the guns. He looked at Hardin. He whispered, "You thinking what I'm thinking." Hardin whispered back, "If we take these guns intact, we could use them." Tucker shook his head. Nobody knows how to fire an 88 except Germans. Those things need math, computers, a 10-man crew. Hardin said maybe. Tucker said maybe nothing. We take those guns, best we can do is blow them up so Jerry can't use them. Hardin didn't respond. He was thinking about Ezra, about the threshing machine, about simple ideas wrapped in metal. But that was a thought for later. Right now they had a mission. The plan was brutally simple. Walsh and Goldstein would approach from the south, get close to the bunker. The rest would spread out around the gun positions. At 0300, Walsh would throw grenades through the bunker door. When the Germans ran out, if they ran out, Hardin's group would cut them down. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sporting. It was murder, technically. But this was war, and in war, the side that killed first usually went home. 0300 arrived like an appointment with the devil. Walsh kicked the bunker door open. He threw 2 grenades. The standard US Mark II fragmentation grenade had a blast radius of 15 feet and a kill radius of 5. In an enclosed space, it was devastation in a can. The grenades went off with a double crump that sounded like the earth clearing its throat. Screaming, German screaming, high and desperate. 3 men stumbled out of the bunker clothes on fire hands clutching faces. Hardin's squad opened up. M1s barked. 8 rounds as fast as you could pull the trigger. The Germans went down. 4 more came out, these ones with weapons. The firing became general, muzzle flashes in the dark. The sharp crack of American 30-06 mixing with the deeper boom of German Mausers. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. When the silence returned, 12 Germans were dead. One of Hardin's men, Goldstein, had taken a round through the shoulder. Martinez was already working on him, cutting away the uniform, packing the wound. The guns stood untouched. Hardin walked to the nearest emplacement. He climbed down into the pit boots, squelching in freezing mud. The flak 36 sat there like a sleeping predator. Even motionless, it radiated menace. The barrel was almost 20 feet long, painted in camouflage green and sand yellow. The breech mechanism looked like something from a factory, all gears and levers and precision German engineering. Tucker jumped down beside him. Beautiful, Tucker said. In In a terrible kind of way. Hardin ran his hand over the cold steel. Instruction plates were riveted to the gun shield, covered in German text. Dials and gauges marked with numbers and words he couldn't read. The elevation and traverse wheels looked like they belonged on a piece of industrial machinery. This thing could kill a tank from 2 miles out, Hardin said. Tucker nodded. If you know how to use it. Hardin looked at the breech, looked at the long barrel, looked at the pile of ammunition crates stacked against the wall of the gun pit. There had to be 200 rounds. Brass shells, 3 feet long, each one weighing 40 pounds. The tips were painted different colors, black for armor piercing, red band for high explosive. All this firepower, Hardin said, just sitting here. He thought about Morrison, about the Sherman that had become a coffin, about the 88 that had killed his friend from a distance so great Morrison never knew it was coming. Now Hardin was standing next to 4 of them. The irony was so thick you could spread it on bread. Dawn came slowly to the Hurtgen. By 0600, the sky had shifted from black to gray to a sick yellow that promised more freezing rain. Hardin radioed Company HQ. The field radio was a SCR, 335 pounds of tubes and wire that barely worked on a good day. Becker operated it, adjusting the frequency until Captain Drummond's voice crackled through. Report, Drummond said. Mission successful, Hardin said. 12 enemy KIA. We control the ridge. 4 88mm flak guns captured intact. A pause. Static hissed. Then Drummond's voice, different now, slower. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Can you hold that position until relief arrives? How long, Hardin asked. 0800, 2 hours we can hold, Hardin said. Another pause. Good. And Sergeant, those guns. We don't have technical crews available. Can you render them inoperable? Hardin looked at the massive artillery pieces. Thought about all that wasted potential. Sir, he said, if we had someone who could operate these guns, we could use them. They're pointed right at the German approach routes. Drummond's voice came back flat. Nobody in this division knows how to fire an 88, Sergeant. Even if they did, we don't have fire control computers. Those guns need math that would make a college professor weep. Your orders are to hold the position and wait for relief. Drummond out. The radio went silent. Tucker looked at Hardin. So we just sit here, looks like it, Hardin said. What about the guns? Hardin shrugged. Drummond didn't actually order us to destroy them. Tucker almost smiled. Technically true. They set up a defensive perimeter. Foxholes at the corners of the ridge. Fields of fire covering the approaches. Martinez patched up Goldstein and gave him enough morphine to make the pain distant and philosophical. The men ate cold rations. Becker tried to restart the radio, but the battery had died. They were alone on the ridge with 4 of the most powerful weapons on the European battlefield and no way to use them. Hardin sat in the gun pit, staring at the 88. His mind kept going back to Ezra, to the threshing machine, to the idea that every complicated thing was just a simple thing in disguise. A gun was a tube, a shell went in one end, fire made it come out the other end very fast. Everything else was just details, but what details? The optical sight alone looked like it required a PhD to understand. The firing tables were covered in logarithms. The traverse and elevation mechanisms were geared so precisely that one full turn of the wheel moved the barrel maybe 2 degrees. This wasn't a rifle. This was a scientific instrument that happened to throw metal. Tucker came over carrying 2 canteens of cold coffee. He handed one to Hardin. You're thinking about it, Tucker said. About what? Using the gun. Hardin took a sip of coffee. It tasted like diesel and regret. Maybe. Tucker sat down on an ammunition crate. It's crazy, Sarge. We don't know what we're doing. Hardin said, my grandfather once told me something. He said the difference between a machine that works and a machine that doesn't is just knowing what the machine is supposed to do. Tucker said, that's philosophy. This is an 88. Same principle, Hardin said. This gun throws a shell. We just need to point it at a target and make it throw. Tucker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what target? Hardin didn't answer, because the answer was, I don't know yet. At 0615, the answer found them. The sound started as a vibration, a low thrumming that you felt in your boots before you heard with your ears. Then came the metallic squeal, the distinctive screech of dry tank tracks on frozen ground. Every man on the ridge froze. Delacroix, who'd been on watch at the eastern edge, came running back. His face had gone this color of old milk. Tanks, he said. 3 of them, big ones, coming from Grossow. Hardin grabbed his binoculars and ran to the edge of the ridge. He dropped prone behind a fallen log and raised the glasses. Through the scratched lenses, he could see the tree line 400 yards to the east. The trees were moving, not swaying, moving, being pushed. Then the first tank emerged. It was a Tiger. Hardin knew the profile instantly. The boxy hull, the massive turret, the long 88mm gun that made the Tiger the most feared tank in the world. Then the second Tiger appeared. Then the third, 3 Tigers, hunting. Behind him, Tucker had come up. He had his own binoculars. He was looking at the same thing Hardin was looking at. Tucker said very quietly, oh Jesus. Hardin said, we need to fall back. Tucker said, they'll cut us down before we make it 200 yards. Hardin knew he was right. The Tigers had machine guns, MG-42s. 1,200 rounds per minute. If Hardin's squad tried to retreat across open ground, they'd be massacred. Rourke had joined them now. The kid's voice was shaking. Sarge, what do? We got 2 bazookas and 3 rockets. That's not enough to stop 3 Tigers. Hardin lowered the binoculars. He looked back at the gun pits. at the four 88s sitting there, useless. The most powerful anti-tank weapons on the battlefield, right there, right in his hands, useless. He thought about Morrison, about the Sherman, about the 88 that had killed his friend. He thought about his grandfather, about simple ideas. He thought about his brother Michael, who'd be shipping to Europe in a month. He thought about the fact that in about 5 minutes, 3 Tiger tanks were going to roll up this ridge and crush 8 American soldiers into the frozen mud. And he made a decision. Tucker, he said, get to gun number 1. Tucker stared at him. Sarge, we don't know how to use that thing. Hardin stood up. We're going to figure it out. You're insane, Rourke said. Hardin looked at the kid. He looked at all of them, probably, he said. But those tanks are coming, whether we're insane or not. We can die doing nothing, or we can die trying something crazy. I'm choosing crazy. Who's with me? Silence. Then Kowalski, the scared Polish kid from Chicago, said, hell, I'm in. Becker said, if we're going to die, might as well die loud. One by one, they nodded. Tucker looked at Hardin for a long moment. Then he said, all right, Sarge, let's point this thing and pull the trigger. They ran to gun pit number 1. The Tigers were 300 yards out and closing. And Sergeant Jack Hardin, farm boy from Kansas, was about to try to do something that no American soldier in the European theater had ever successfully done. He was going to fire a German 88mm anti-aircraft gun at a German heavy tank using nothing but Kentucky windage and pure American stubbornness. The Tigers were not rushing, they were hunting. At 250 yards through the morning mist that clung to the valley floor like smoke, Hardin could see them clearly now. 3 massive shapes moving in a wedge formation. The lead tank had its commander's hatch open. A German officer stood in the cupola, scanning the ridge through binoculars. He looked confident. He looked like a man who knew he owned the battlefield. He was right to be confident. A Tiger I tank weighed 63 tons. Its frontal armor was 4 inches of hardened steel. An American 75mm Sherman shell would bounce off it like a pebble off a locomotive. The Tiger's own gun, the deadly 88, could kill a Sherman from 2 miles away. 3 Tigers working together were effectively invulnerable to anything the Americans had, except maybe to the 4 German 88s sitting on the ridge, if Hardin could figure out how to use them. In the gun pit, Kowalski was making a sound that was half prayer, half whimper. The kid was 19 years old. He'd lied about his age to enlist. His mother thought he was working in a factory in Detroit. She'd sent him a letter last week asking when he'd be home for Christmas. Kowalski wasn't going to make it home for Christmas. None of them were. Walsh, the boxer from New York, had his M1 rifle up, aiming at the lead Tiger. His hands were steady, but his face had gone gray. He knew what Hardin knew, what they all knew. A rifle against a Tiger was like a toothpick against a bear. Becker was crouched by the gun, one hand on the cold steel, staring at the complex mechanism like it was a puzzle written in a language he'd forgotten. He spoke German. His parents had come from Bavaria in 1927. But speaking German and understanding German military technical specifications were 2 different things. Tucker stood beside Hardin, watching the Tigers advance. His Texas drawl had flattened out, gone hard. He said, how far can we run before they see us? Not far enough, Hardin said. Tucker nodded. He'd already known the answer. He just needed to hear someone else say it. The math was brutal. The Tigers were moving at maybe 5 miles per hour, cautious through the rough terrain. That gave Hardin's squad maybe 8 minutes before the tanks reached effective machine gun range. Once those MG-42s opened up, the ridge would become a killing ground. The Germans would suppress the American positions with machine gun fire, while the Tigers maneuvered for kill shots with their main guns. 8 minutes. Hardin looked at the 88. The massive gun sat in its sandbagged pit like a sleeping dragon. The barrel pointed uselessly at the gray sky. Everything about it screamed complexity. The optical sight with its ground glass and crosshairs calibrated for targets at 20,000 feet. The elevation mechanism with its brass gears and German markings. The firing solution tables riveted to the gun shield covered in logarithms and trigonometry. This was a weapon designed by engineers for professionals. It required a crew of 10 men, a rangefinder to measure distance, a computer operator to calculate ballistic solutions, a fuse setter to time the shell's detonation, a loader, a gunner, a commander who'd spent 6 months learning the mathematics of death. Hardin had none of that. What he had was 7 terrified infantrymen and a memory of his grandfather fixing a threshing machine with baling wire and stubbornness. The Tigers were at 200 yards now. Hardin made a decision. He said, open the breech. Tucker stared at him. Sarge, we don't know what we're doing. Hardin grabbed the heavy steel handle on the breech block. It was cold enough to burn his palm through his glove. I don't care, he said. It's a gun. It has a hole at one end and a trigger at the other. We're going to figure it out. The breech mechanism fought him. It was stiff with cold grease and German precision engineering. Hardin put his shoulder into it, grunting, straining against metal that didn't want to be operated by American hands. With a metallic clunk that sounded like a bank vault opening, the breech block slid down. The chamber lay open, a dark, hungry mouth waiting to be fed. Hardin looked through the barrel from the rear. He could see a circle of daylight at the far end. He could see trees, sky, the ghost of a target that didn't know it was about to become history. Tucker said, what now? Hardin turned to the pile of ammunition crates stacked against the wall of the gun pit. The crates were stenciled with German text: Panzer Granite, armor piercing. He said, grab a shell, the big ones with the black tips. Kowalski and Rourke moved to the crates. They were hesitating. This was insanity. This was against every regulation in the field manual. You don't fire captured heavy artillery without training. You don't engage armored targets with anti-aircraft guns using manual sights. It was a great way to blow yourself up. Then the lead Tiger fired. The sound was a sharp crack like the world's largest whip. The high explosive shell slammed into the ridge 50 yards downslope, throwing up a fountain of frozen dirt and shattered rock. The shockwave rolled over them, a physical slap of overpressure that knocked Rourke flat on his back. The debate was over. Hardin grabbed Rourke by his webbing and hauled him up. I said, grab a shell. The plan forming in Hardin's mind wasn't elegant, it wasn't proper, it was barely a plan at all. The Germans used optical sights and mathematical firing tables. Hardin was going to use his eyeballs. He was going to point the barrel like a giant finger, strip away the science, and turn the 88 into the world's biggest pistol. Simple and simple, outbang. He climbed into the gunner's seat. The metal bucket was wet with condensation, ice cold against his legs. Two heavy iron hand wheels sat in front of him, one on the left, one on the right. The left controlled traverse, swinging the gun horizontally. The right was elevation, tilting the barrel up and down. Hardin grabbed the elevation wheel and cranked it hard. The mechanism resisted gears, grinding, and then caught. The long barrel began to descend from its skyward position. It came down slowly, groaning like a falling tree in slow motion, inch by agonizing inch. The Tigers were at 175 yards. Hardin spun the wheel faster. Sweat broke out on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. The barrel had to come level, had to point at the ground instead of the clouds, had to become a weapon against Earth targets instead of sky targets. The barrel locked horizontal with a heavy click. Now it looked predatory. Now it looked like what it was, a gun that could reach out across 400 yards of battlefield and turn steel into scrap metal. But aiming was the problem. Hardin pressed his eye against the rubber cup of the optical sight. All he saw was a blur of German numbers and crosshairs calibrated for bombers 3 miles up. At this range, trying to use the sight was like trying to read a newspaper through a telescope. Useless. He pulled back, cursing. The Tigers were at 150 yards. He could hear their engines now, the deep coughing roar of Maybach motors pushing all that weight across frozen ground. He didn't have time to learn German ballistics. Then he remembered something from basic training a lifetime ago at Fort Riley. An old sergeant, a veteran of the First World War, talking about how French 75s had been aimed at Belleau Wood when the sights were damaged. Bore sighting, the oldest trick in the artillery manual. If you can see the target through the barrel, the shell will hit the target. Simple geometry. The barrel is a tube. The shell travels down the tube. Point the tube at the target, pull the trigger. Hardin jumped out of the gunner's seat and ran to the back of the gun. He shoved Tucker aside and put his face right up to the open breech, looking straight through the 30-foot steel tube. At the far end, framed in a perfect circle of daylight, he saw the muddy field. He grabbed the traverse wheel from the side, spinning it while keeping one eye fixed on the view through the barrel. The circle of light shifted, trees slid past, a burned-out Jeep, a shattered pine. Then the circle filled with gray steel, the lead Tiger centered perfectly. Hardin could see every detail. The mud caked on the spare track links, the commander still standing in the open hatch, binoculars raised, the long gun barrel starting to traverse, hunting for targets. Lock it there, Hardin said. Tucker locked the hand wheels. Load it, Hardin yelled, jumping back to the gunner's seat. Kowalski grabbed a shell from the open crate. The brass casing was over 3 feet long, topped with a wicked, black-tipped projectile. It weighed 39 pounds. Kowalski was a 130-pound kid who looked like a strong wind would knock him over. He struggled with the weight boots slipping in the mud. He hugged the shell against his chest like it was a baby he was trying not to drop. He stumbled toward the breech. He wasn't gentle. He rammed the nose of the shell into the chamber and shoved it home with both hands. The rim clicked against the extractors. The breech block was spring-loaded. As soon as the shell seated, the block would slam shut with enough force to amputate fingers. Kowalski knew this. He shoved the shell and snatched his hands back like he'd touched a hot stove. The breech block snapped upward with a metallic clang. The gun was live. Hardin put his boot on the firing pedal. He didn't check the sights again. He trusted the bore sight, trusted the geometry, trusted that if he could see the Tiger through the barrel, the shell would find it. The Tiger was at 125 yards now, close enough that Hardin could see the German cross painted on the turret, close enough to see the commander's face, young, maybe 25, blonde hair. He looked like he could be Carl Becker's cousin. The German commander must have seen the 88's barrel drop and traverse, must have seen the muzzle turn toward him, but he probably didn't believe it. He knew the Americans didn't have trained 88 crews. He probably thought the gun was abandoned. He kept coming. His confidence was about to kill him. Hardin took a breath, held it, and stomped the pedal The 88 unleashed hell. It was a physical snap of air pressure, a sound that hit like a slap across the face. A tongue of flame 10 feet long erupted from the muzzle brake, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and dead leaves and frozen earth. The 9,000-pound gun leaped backward on its wheels. The recoil spades dug deep furrows in the ground. The entire world turned white for a split second, a flash that seared itself into Hardin's retinas. He was thrown back against the metal seat. His ears went dead, replaced by a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. The shell left the barrel at 2,600 feet per second. At that velocity, gravity was a suggestion. The round didn't arc. It flew in a perfectly straight line, a laser beam of hardened steel, but because Hardin had aimed by looking through the barrel, he hadn't accounted for the jump. The recoil, the slight elevation shift that happens when a big gun fires. The shell screamed past the turret of the lead Tiger, missing the steel by less than 3 feet. It kept going, slammed into a massive oak tree 200 yards behind the tank. The tree didn't splinter. It vaporized. The trunk simply ceased to exist, turning into a cloud of wood chips and pulverized bark that hung in the air like fog. Hardin blinked, trying to clear his vision. His ears were still ringing. Mist Rourke was screaming, "You missed him, Sarge." Hardin didn't need the commentary, he could see. But the miss had an effect. The German column froze. The lead Tiger slammed on its brakes, the massive hull rocking violently on its suspension. The commander dropped into the turret and slammed the hatch. The casual confidence was gone now, the Germans knew. The Americans weren't just watching, they were shooting back. With the Germans' own weapons, the turret of the lead Tiger began to rotate. Slow, mechanical, menacing. The long 88mm gun swinging around to find the source of fire. Electric motors whined. The barrel hunted. Tucker was yelling, "Reload, get another one in there." The crew was clumsy, terrified. Kowalski fumbling with the next shell. His hands were slick with mud and fear. He dropped it. The heavy brass clanged against the metal gun mount. "Pick it up," Hardin roared. "Pick it up or we're dead." The Tiger's turret was halfway around now. The black hole of its muzzle was looking for them. What had been an ambush was now a duel, and it was an unfair duel. The Tiger had a telescopic sight, a trained crew, a coaxial machine gun. Hardin had a manual traverse wheel and a bunch of infantrymen who'd never fired anything bigger than a mortar. The Tiger's machine gun opened up first. Tracers zipped over the lip of the gun pit, snapping through the air like angry hornets. They sparked off the gun shield, sending splinters of lead flying into the mud. Rourke hit the deck, covering his head. The suppression fire was doing its job, keeping the Americans down while the tank lined up the kill shot. Hardin stayed in the seat. He hunched behind the steel shield, cranking the traverse wheel blindly. He had to move the aim to the left. He'd missed right, had to correct. But by how much? How many degrees? How many turns of the wheel? No, he was guessing. Operating on instinct, the kind of animal panic that shuts down the thinking brain and leaves only reflexes. He felt the vibration of bullets hitting the shield, felt the heat radiating from the barrel. The gun had just fired. The metal was still hot enough to blister skin. Kowalski managed to pick up the shell. The kid was crying, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face, but he was moving. He shoved the round into the breech, punched it home with a grunt. The block slammed shut. Up, Kowalski screamed. Guns up. Hardin peeked over the top of the shield. The Tiger was stationary now, hull angled, presenting its thickest armor. The turret had stopped rotating. The gun was pointing directly at Hardin's face. It was a staring contest. Two identical weapons, one mounted on a tank, one sitting in the mud. But the Germans weren't alone. The second Tiger in the formation had moved up, pushing through the brush to the right, flanking, trying to get a side angle on the American position. The situation was spiraling. Hardin had one gun, one loaded shell, and two Tigers bearing down. The ground shook as the second Tiger accelerated its engine, screaming. They were closing the distance. They weren't going to sit back and snipe. They were going to overrun the position, crush the gun and crew under 60 tons of German steel. Hardin looked at the lead tank. He saw the flash. The muzzle brake flared orange. The Tiger fired. Hardin didn't hear the shot. He saw the shell, a black blur in the air, a smudge against the gray sky. It hit the dirt berm 10 feet in front of the gun pit. The explosion was deafening, a wall of wet earth and sandbags thrown into the air. The concussion knocked the wind out of Hardin's lungs. He gasped, spitting mud, wiping his eyes. Still alive. The German gunner had fired high, aimed for the center of the pit, but hit the lip. Hardin scrambled back to the controls. The gun was still functional. Debris had piled around the wheels, but the barrel was clear. He wiped mud off the firing pedal, looked down the side of the barrel at the Tiger. The tank was reloading. He could see the puffs of smoke from its exhaust, could imagine the loader inside grabbing another shell, ramming it home. 6 seconds, maybe 7. Then the next round would come in, and the next one wouldn't be high. The German gunner would correct, drop the shell right into Hardin's lap. This was the race. German loader versus American loader. Who could pull the trigger first? Hardin cranked the traverse wheel one last time. Small adjustment. Didn't aim for the hull. The hull was too thick. Aimed higher. For the joint where the turret met the body, the turret ring. The weak spot, the neck. He took a breath, held the freezing air in his lungs to steady his shaking leg, watched the tiger, watched the black barrel, stomp the pedal. The second shot was different. When the first round had missed, the energy had scattered into the forest, but this time the connection was solid. The gun spoke with finality. The 88 bucked violently, sliding back 2 feet in the mud. The recoil system groaned, absorbing the massive kinetic punch. The brass casing ejected with a hollow clunk, spinning through the air, landing in the slush, steaming hot. Hardin wasn't looking at the casing. He was looking at the tiger. At 125 yards, flight time was effectively 0. The armor-piercing shell slammed into the tiger's turret ring. The one vertical trap in its sloped armor, the vulnerable junction where the 11-ton turret connected to the chassis. The impact didn't just bend the steel, it liquefied it. The massive bolts holding the turret sheared off, instantly brittle in the cold, overpowered by the kinetic energy of a shell traveling faster than sound. To the men watching from the foxholes around the ridge, it looked like a magic trick. The tiger's turret lifted straight up into the air, not slowly, violently, a jagged uppercut that disconnected 11 tons of steel from the chassis. The turret flipped backward in a lazy, terrible arc and crashed onto the rear engine deck of the tank. The gun barrel, which had been pointing at Hardin 1 second ago, was now pointing uselessly at the sky. A gout of flame erupted from the open hole where the turret used to be, a pillar of fire reaching 20 feet high, bright orange against the gray morning. The ammunition inside the tank had cooked off. Shells detonating in sequence, a string of firecrackers made of high explosive. The tiger was dead. Got him. Kowalski screamed, his voice raw and breaking. You took his head off. You took his goddamn head off. Walsh was laughing, a high hysterical sound. We killed a tiger. We actually killed a tiger. But Hardin wasn't celebrating. Behind the burning wreck, the second tiger was still moving, and the crew of that second tank was now very, very angry. They'd just watched their platoon leader get decapitated by a captured gun. They'd seen their invincible tiger torn apart by Americans who weren't supposed to know how to fight back. They weren't going to make the same mistake of sitting still. The second tiger revved its engine and slewed sideways, accelerating toward the tree line, looking for cover. The commander knew he was exposed, knew Hardin had another gun. Traverse right, Hardin yelled, spinning the wheel. He's running. The heavy gun fought him. The 88 was designed for stationary air defense, not tracking fast-moving ground targets. The gears were too slow, too precise. Built for careful adjustments against bombers at altitude, not desperate close-range tank duels. Hardin cranked the handle with both hands, muscles burning. The long barrel chased the tiger, but the tank was faster. It disappeared behind a thicket of pines, engine roar fading as it maneuvered. Hardin knew what it was doing, circling, looking for a flank shot. It would come out on their right side where the gun shield offered zero protection. We need to move the gun, Hardin shouted. He jumped out of the seat, grabbed one of the trails, the long stabilizing legs that held the gun in place. We have to spin the whole thing. This was impossible. The Flak 36 weighed over 7 tons when deployed. The trails were dug into the earth. You were supposed to fold them up, attach wheels, use a truck to move it. They didn't have a truck. They didn't have time. Tucker and Walsh and Becker grabbed the steel beams. Heave Hardin grunted, boots slipping in the mud. The gun didn't move. It was sucked into the frozen ground like a gravestone. Come on, Hardin screamed. Push! They threw their weight into it, veins popping, backs straining, the kind of effort that tears muscles and breaks bones. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive weapon began to slide. The mud made a sucking sound as it released its grip. They rotated the gun 45 degrees right, pointing it toward the woods, where the tiger had vanished. Load. Hardin gasped, climbing back into the seat. Kowalski grabbed another shell. This one was covered in grit. He wiped it on his sleeve like it was a precious thing and shoved it into the breech. The breech slammed. They waited. The woods were silent. The first tiger still burned in the field, black smoke drifting across the ridge. But from the right flank, nothing. No engine noise, no movement. Where is he? Rourke whispered. Hardin scanned the tree line. The tiger was a predator. Stalking. It could be waiting for them to reveal themselves. Or crawling through a ravine to come up behind them. Then Hardin saw it. Not the tank. A glint of metal. Through the trees, not in front of them. The German commander was smart. He'd stayed deep in the timber using the forest as a screen. He was going to fire through the woods. A tree at the edge exploded. The tiger had fired blindly, clearing a firing lane with high explosive. The tree toppled, crashing down, revealing the gray hull sitting in shadows. Hull down, buried in a depression. Only the turret visible. A sniper's position. The German gunner had a perfect shot at Hardin's exposed flank. Hardin didn't have time to aim properly, didn't have time to bore sight again. The tiger was already traversing its turret. He did the only thing he could think of. He pointed the gun low, not at the tank, at the ground in front of the tank. Fire, he yelled. The 88 roared. The shell slammed into the soft earth 20 yards in front of the Tiger. It didn't hit the tank, but it threw up a curtain of dirt rocks, pulverized wood, an instant smoke screen. The Tiger fired a split second later, but blind. The shell whizzed over Hardin's head, missing by feet. The wind of its passage knocked Kowalski flat. He can't see us, Hardin yelled. Hit him again. Same spot. Kowalski loaded. Hardin fired. Another geyser of dirt. The Tiger machine gunned the smoke, spraying blindly. Bullets pinged off the barrel. Hardin adjusted his aim, brought the muzzle up a fraction. He was guessing elevation, imagining the trajectory, visualizing the shell passing through the smoke and finding steel. Come on, baby, he whispered. Don't fail me now. He fired. The smoke cleared for an instant, pushed away by blast pressure. Through the haze, Hardin saw a spark. A bright white flash on the Tiger's turret. The angle had been too steep. The shell had glanced off the rounded mantlet, deflecting harmlessly into the sky. The Tiger realized it had survived. It began to drive forward, climbing out of its hole. Coming to finish this. The engine roared. The tank lurched forward, smashing through saplings. It was 50 yards away, a metal mountain. Last shell, Kowalski screamed. Hardin looked at the ammunition crate. Empty. The other crates were red-banded, high explosive, useless against armor. They had one armor-piercing round left, one shot to stop a 60-ton monster. The Tiger was accelerating, not stopping to shoot, coming to ram them, to grind the 88 and the Americans into the frozen earth. Hardin watched it close the distance. 40 yards, 30. He could see the Zimmerit pace pattern clearly now, could see mud flying off the tracks. He forced himself to wait. Couldn't miss this, couldn't ricochet. Needed a flat surface. Needed the driver's plate. 25 yards. The Tiger dipped into a small drainage ditch. For a split second, the nose went down. The vertical armor plate in front of the driver flattened out relative to Hardin's gun. A window of opportunity, less than 1 second. Hardin didn't think, didn't breathe, stomped. The shell covered 30 yards in less than a blink. Hit the driver's plate dead center. No ricochet this time. The shell punched through, carried all its kinetic energy inside the cramped fighting compartment. The Tiger stopped instantly, shuddered like it had hit a wall. Smoke poured from the driver's vision slit. The engine sputtered and died. Momentum carried it forward another 5 feet, sliding in the mud before it came to rest, 20 yards from Hardin's face. Silence returned to the ridge. Hardin sat in the metal seat, boot still pressed to the floor, watching the tank, waiting. No hatches opened. No crew emerged. The monster was dead. Tucker was the first to speak. His voice came out as a croak. Sarge, what about the third one? Hardin had forgotten about the third Tiger. He looked east, scanning the field through the smoke and morning mist. The third tank was still there, but it had stopped advancing. The commander had watched 2 Tigers die in less than 5 minutes, had seen American infantry do the impossible with captured weapons. The Tiger's turret began to rotate, not toward Hardin, away, toward the south. It's retreating, Walsh said, disbelief in his voice. Tucker grabbed Hardin's shoulder. We did it. We actually did it. But Hardin was still watching the third Tiger. Something felt wrong. The retreat was too orderly, too deliberate. Then he understood. The German commander wasn't retreating out of fear. He was repositioning, buying time, calling for reinforcements, and he'd just gotten them. From the south where the third Tiger was now pointing came a new sound, diesel engines, multiple engines. The distinctive rumble of American radial motors, the relief column. Cresting the hill behind the American position came a jeep. Behind it a half-track, behind that 5 Sherman tanks, their long 76mm guns pointing forward. The German Tiger commander saw them, did the math. 3 against 1 was bad odds even for a Tiger. The massive tank gunned its engine and began backing into the forest, not running, conducting a fighting withdrawal, professional, disciplined. The lead Sherman fired. The 76mm shell hit the Tiger's frontal armor and sparked off harmlessly. Too far. Wrong angle. The Tiger disappeared into the tree line, swallowed by the forest. It was over. Hardin slumped forward, resting his forehead against the cold steel of the breech. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't let go of the wheels. Tucker pulled him up out of the gunner's seat. You did it, Sarge. You killed 2 Tigers with a gun you didn't know how to use. Hardin looked at the smoking barrel, at the pile of spent brass casings, at the 2 dead Tigers sitting in the field like monuments to desperation. We got lucky, he said. His voice was hoarse raw from smoke and shouting. Tucker laughed. It was a broken sound, half relief, half hysteria. Luck had nothing to do with it. The relief column rolled up to the ridge. An officer jumped out of the lead jeep. A captain, clean boots, fresh uniform. He looked at the scene like he'd stumbled into someone else's war. Captain Elias Drummond walked over to where Hardin stood. He looked at the dead Tigers, looked at the German 88, looked at Hardin. He said, Sergeant, who killed those Tigers? Hardin looked up. He spat a glob of mud onto the ground. We did, sir. With that. He pointed at the gun. Drummond's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, respect, horror. He said, you used a German 88 without a fire control crew. Hardin said, didn't need one, sir. Point and click. Behind Drummond, another officer had emerged from the second jeep, an older man, a major carrying a camera and a notebook. His uniform insignia marked him as Ordnance Corps, Major Richard Klein. He walked to the first Tiger, studying the catastrophic damage to the turret ring. He took photographs, measurements, notes. Then he came to the gun pit. Klein looked at Hardin like he was examining a particularly interesting specimen. "Walk me through it," Klein said. "Everything you did." Hardin explained the bore sighting, the manual traverse, the guesswork, the desperation. Klein wrote it all down. When Hardin finished, the major looked at his notes for a long time. Then he said, "Sergeant, do you understand what you just did?" "Survived," Hardin said. Klein shook his head. "You hit a moving armored target at over 300 yards using a weapon system designed for aircraft at 20,000 feet. You did it without optical sights, without a fire control computer, without training. The probability of that shot connecting was, mathematically speaking, nearly zero." Hardin took a cigarette from Tucker, lit it with shaking hands. "The nearly is doing a lot of work in that sentence, sir." Klein almost smiled. "I'm going to write a report. Field expedient gunnery tactics. Use of captured heavy weapons by non-specialist personnel. This is going to change how we think about battlefield adaptation." Hardin said, "That's a fancy way of saying we got desperate, sir." Klein looked at him. "No, Sergeant. Desperation is random. What you did was deliberate. You saw a problem, analyzed available resources, and implemented an unorthodox solution. That's ingenuity." Tucker, standing nearby, said, "It was also stupid as hell, sir." No offense to the sergeant. Klein said, "The line between stupid and brilliant is often drawn by whoever survives to write the history. You survived. That makes it brilliant." He closed his notebook. "I'm recommending your entire squad for Bronze Stars, and I'm putting your names in the after-action report. Command needs to know that American soldiers can outthink German engineers when it counts. By 0900 hours, the ridge had been secured. Engineers arrived to assess the captured guns. Medics tended to the wounded. Doc Martinez had worked on everyone. Goldstein's shoulder would heal, though he'd probably never have full mobility again. Rourke had taken shrapnel in his leg, nothing serious. Walsh had a concussion. Kowalski had bruised ribs from being thrown around the gun pit. But all 8 men were alive. All 8 were going home someday." Hardin sat on an ammunition crate, hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee someone had given him. Real coffee this time, not the powdered shit they usually got. Kowalski sat down next to him. The kid had stopped crying an hour ago. Now he just looked empty. They didn't speak for a while. Then Kowalski said, "I killed people today. Loaded the shells that killed them." Hardin said, "They were trying to kill us." "I know," Kowalski said, "but they're still dead, and I helped." "It doesn't get easier," Hardin said. "Anyone who tells you it does is lying, but it gets necessary, and necessary is all we got out here." Kowalski nodded. He looked less empty now, less alone. They sat watching the engineers work on the guns, watching the medics tend the wounded, watching the war continue around them like it always did. 2 days later, Hardin wrote letters. The dugout where Company K was billeted smelled like wet wool and cigarette smoke. A single kerosene lantern hung from a beam. Hardin sat underneath it, pencil and handpaper on his knee. The first letter was to his mother. "Dear Ma," he wrote, "I'm alive and well. We had some excitement a few days ago, but it turned out fine. I can't give you details, but I want you to know I thought about Grandpa Ezra. He taught me something about fixing broken things that saved my life. Tell him thank you. Tell him I finally understand what he meant about finding the simple idea. I got your letter about Michael. When he gets here, I'll do my best to look after him. That's a promise. Give Dad my regards. Tell him I know he doesn't approve of this war, but I'm trying to make it count for something. Your son, Jack." The second letter was harder. He'd carried the idea of it for 4 months, since Morrison died in his place. "Dear Mrs. Morrison," he wrote, "you don't know me, but I served with your husband Dave. I was supposed to be in his tank the day he died. He took my place because I was sick. I've thought about that every day since. Yesterday I got a chance to pay him back. I won't bore you with details, but I used a German 88, the same kind of gun that killed Dave, to destroy enemy armor. When I pulled the trigger, I said his name. I want you to know Dave's death wasn't meaningless. The weapon that took him helped save 8 American lives. There's probably a lesson there about justice, but I'm too tired to work it out. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry you lost him. But I made them pay. With respect, Sergeant Jack Hardin." He folded both letters. He knew his mother would read between the lines, would pray harder. And Morrison's widow might never read her letter. He hadn't decided if he'd send it, but writing it made something loosen in his chest. Tucker came over with more coffee. They sat together in the lamplight. "You think we'll make it?" Tucker asked. "All the way to Berlin." Hardin said, "I think we'll make it as far as we make it. Thinking past tomorrow is bad luck." "What are you going to do when it's over?" Tucker asked. "Go back to the farm," Hardin said. "Try to forget. Fail at forgetting." "That's the truth," Tucker said. November became December. December became January. The war ground on. Hardin's squad fought through. The rest of the Hurricane took casualties, got replacements. They crossed the Roa River, pushed deeper into Germany, saw things they would never talk about. In March, they heard about the bridge at Remagen. In April, they linked up with the Russians. In May, Germany surrendered. Hardin survived all of it. Michael arrived in February green and terrified. Hardin kept his promise, kept his brother close, taught him how to stay low, how to read terrain, how to survive. Michael made it home too. The real ending comes 35 years later, Salina, Kansas, June 1979. The farm looked the same as it always had. Rolling wheat fields, green in summer sun, the old barn, the house with the porch where his father used to sit. Jack Harden was 61 years old, gray hair, scarred hands. He moves slower now, knees complaining about old injuries. He was in the workshop when his grandson found him. The boy was 12, Michael's son. He had his father's eyes. Grandpa Jack, the boy said, "Can you help with my math homework?" Hardin looked at the algebra problems, variables and equations that had never made sense to him. "I was never good at this," he said. "Your dad's the smart one, but Dad says you were a hero in the war." Hardin felt the old discomfort. The word hero never fit right. "Your dad exaggerates," Hardin said. "He says you destroyed Nazi tanks using their own gun." Hardin paused. "Two," he said. "The third one got away. Get your facts straight." "How'd you do it if you're not good at math?" the boy asked. Hardin put down his wrench. "Come here, let me show you something." He demonstrated a simple fix on the broken tractor. Rope and wire instead of a proper belt. "Sometimes the simple answer is better than the complicated one," Hardin said. "Sometimes you don't have time for formulas. You look at what goes in, what comes out, and how to make it go." The boy thought about this. "But my teacher says we have to show our work." "Your teacher's right for school," Hardin said, "but life doesn't always wait. Sometimes you point and pull the trigger and hope geometry is on your side." "Did it work?" the boy asked. "Twice out of 3 times," Hardin said. "Good enough to stay alive." "Were you scared?" Terrified, Hardin said. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop. You keep moving and figure it out as you go." He went to the shelf, pulled down a metal box. Inside were medals he never wore. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, campaign ribbons. And something else, a spent 88mm shell casing, engraved Ridge 402, November 20th, 1944. Tucker had saved it, sent it after the war with a note that said, "So you remember the day we beat the odds." Hardin handed it to his grandson. "Keep this," he said. "Remind yourself the answer isn't always in the textbook. Sometimes you trust your gut." "What happened to the other guys?" the boy asked. Hardin's face did something complicated. Tucker died in 71. Heart attack. Dead at 55. Kowalski runs a bar in Chicago. Rourke became a teacher. Goldstein went back to Brooklyn, opened a pawn shop, last I heard. The rest I lost touch with. "We were never really friends," Hardin said. "Just guys who went through hell together. That's different." Later, after the boy had gone to play, Hardin stood alone in the workshop. He thought about Ridge 402. About the Tigers, about desperate gunnery that shouldn't have worked. History would never mention it. The textbooks would talk about Hurtgen Forest, about the casualties, about the strategic failure. Not about a farm boy who forgot the manual and remembered his grandfather. That was fine. History remembered generals. It forgot dog faces. But Hardin knew the truth. The German 88 was a masterpiece. Precise, powerful, perfect. But on a frozen ridge, it met something stronger than German steel, American stubbornness, the refusal to accept impossible, the willingness to try the crazy thing when the smart thing meant dying. Ezra had been right. Every machine was just a simple idea wrapped in metal. The Germans wrapped their idea in complexity and mathematics in precision. Hardin had stripped it away, found the simple idea, shell in, shell out, point and shoot. He looked at the tractor the jury-rigged belt was holding. "Good enough," he said. He thought about Morrison, about the men who didn't make it, about being 61 and working a farm while better men stayed 24 forever in Belgian graves. The guilt never left, but it had dulled, worn smooth by time, and the understanding that survivor's guilt was the price of surviving. He walked back toward the farmhouse. The Kansas sky was enormous overhead, blue and endless. Hardin looked up and remembered another sky gray and threatening above a German forest. He remembered the 88 firing, the crack that slapped the air, the Tiger's turret lifting into the sky. He remembered being 26 and certain he was about to die, and he remembered the moment after when the silence returned and he was still breathing. That moment defined everything after the rest of the war, coming home, building a life, growing old, all of it borrowed time stolen by a desperate gamble. He reached the porch, sat in his father's chair. The wood was warm from sun. His father had been wrong. They hadn't died for nothing. They'd fought for something real, for each other, for the folks back home who deserved a world without jackboots. And they'd won, not because American weapons were better. The Germans had better tanks, better guns, better training. But Americans had something Germans couldn't engineer, the refusal to quit. The stubbornness that turned farm boys into tank killers. On Ridge 402, that stubbornness wore Hardin's face. He closed his eyes, let the sun warm his skin. 8 men, 4 guns, 3 tigers. And one crazy idea that changed everything. We stole their thunder, Hardin thought, just like we said we would. The wind moved through wheat fields, making them whisper. In that whisper, Hardin could almost hear Tucker laughing, Kowalski crying, the sharp crack of an 88 tearing morning apart. But mostly he heard silence, the good kind. the kind that meant peace. He opened his eyes, looked at the farm his grandfather planted, his father tended, he inherited. This was what they fought for, this quiet, this ordinary miracle of a summer afternoon in Kansas. Not glorious, not heroic, just good enough. And good enough, Hardin had learned, was all you really needed. The screen door opened. His grandson came out with lemonade. Thought you might be thirsty, Grandpa. Hardin took the glass. The lemonade was cold and sweet and tasted like home. Thank you. The boy sat next to him. Grandpa, the boy said, do you ever think about the war? Every day, Hardin said, but not the fighting. I think about the guys. Wonder what Tucker would say about Carter being president. Wonder if Kowalski's bar is still open. Wonder if Rourke's students know their teacher loaded shells while crying. Do you miss them? I miss who we were, Hardin said. Before we knew what war meant, we thought it would be an adventure. Then we learned different. But you won. We survived, Hardin corrected. Not the same as winning, the boy thought. But you stopped the bad guys. That counts. Hardin smiled. A tired smile, but real. Yeah, I guess it does. They sat in silence as the sun tracked west. And in that silence on that porch, surrounded by wheat and memories, Sergeant Jack Hardin made peace with Ridge 402. He'd done what he had to, saved who he could, fought with what he had. The textbooks would never know his name. History would forget him like it forgot all the dog faces. But his grandson would remember, would carry that shell casing, would understand that simple beats complicated sometimes. Maybe that was enough. The sun continued its arc. The wheat whispered, the world turned, and Jack Hardin, who once pointed a German gun at a German tank and pulled an American trigger, sat on his porch and watched afternoon fade to evening. At peace. At last, the captured 88mm guns from Ridge 402 were towed to the rear on November 21st, 1944. They were repainted with American stars, used by artillery units for the rest of the war, but they never fired another shot like the ones Jack Hardin took that day. That moment existed only once, in the hands of a farm boy who didn't know any better than to try the impossible. The German 88 was a masterpiece. Precise, powerful, perfect, but it met something stronger. American refusal to quit, willingness to improvise, stubborn belief there's always another way. That day, ingenuity beat perfection, stubbornness beat science, and a man who failed algebra taught the master race a lesson they never forgot. You don't need a PhD to pull a trigger, you just need a reason. And 8 men who want to go home is reason enough.